Do you own an AU or a BA Falcon that is idling just a little bit too high? Or perhaps when you give it a rev, do the revs kind of hang there for a second before they drop back down again? Or maybe, BA specifically, every now and then when you go and start the car, it'll idle incredibly roughly like it's running on 3 cylinders. Well, all 3 of those things are signs that your intake manifold gaskets are stuffed. So today, I'm going to show you how you can fix it. So for those who don't know, what I'm talking about here is there are gaskets in this intake manifold, and what happens with time is they become brittle, they can break up into many different pieces, and those pieces can start falling out. And what that means is the engine is actually sucking in additional air. So when the engine is trying to idle, the throttle body is actually fully closed, and it uses this idle speed controller to sort of bleed air through into the intake manifold, into the cylinders so the engine can run. So it's this controller which tries to set the idle. It can open and close and let varying amounts of air through. And it's that mechanism which means the engine can idle exactly where the ECU wants it to. But what happens is when there's additional air getting sucked in, whether it's between the upper and the lower part of the manifold here, or even where the manifold meets the head, the engine has got more air to burn, and so the ECU has to inject more fuel in to even out the air-fuel ratio so that it can run and idle correctly. So basically what that means is the engine will idle higher than it should. It'll get rev hang, which is what I was talking about earlier. The revs, when you rev it up, it'll take longer to drop back down. And it may also feel like the car is kind of pushing you down the road even though you haven't got your foot on the accelerator. That is something I've personally experienced with the BA Falcon. So this is very much an AU/BA, perhaps even E-Series problem with the 6-cylinder engines, of course. And basically with the BA Falcons, it seems to be an even more serious problem because with that model, the ECU can actually go into a limp home sort of a mode when you start the engine. It might not happen every time you start the car, but just perhaps maybe 1 in every 10 starts, you might experience a really extremely rough, sort of a chunky idle. The whole car shakes and you basically can't drive the thing. You have to turn it off. And then when you turn it on again, it might idle completely fine. So if that has happened to you, and it did personally happen to me on my BA Falcon, it is a 100% sign that your intake manifold gaskets are shot. So firstly guys, I must warn you, this is not a very difficult job, but it takes a hell of a long time. You only need basic tools, but as a result, this video is going to be a 1 hour plus epic long format video. So what I'll do is I'll put some time codes in the video description, but you'll also notice on the time bar at the bottom of the video, I've got some chapters. So skip ahead for the particular bits you want to check out, or you can just skip the foreplay altogether and go straight to the crescendo at the end. So let's get straight into it. So what are you going to need for this job? Oh, before that, here's the gasket set I've bought. Now this is really every single gasket or seal or pretty much anything that this engine needs. So we're not going to need most of this. It's even got exhaust manifold gaskets. It's got a head gasket in the bottom there. That's for around the rocker cover. Rocker cover's not leaking on this, so I'm not going to do any of that today. So let's just hack our way in here. So I don't know what those ones are, but yeah, we need that square one for the throttle body when we put him back on. So that's for where the intake manifold meets the head. So we'll need that. So this is the gasket that goes between the upper and the lower half of the intake manifold. So we need that one. We need the one that goes to the head, and then we just need to do the one on the throttle body right there. So in order to do this job, it's not easy. You need hex bits. I've got this little kit here that's got all different sizes of hex and bolts and things like that. Hex heads and stuff. That's because these bolts on the upper and lower half are hex. The ones on the throttle body are also hex. And the ones fixing it to the head are just normal bolts, so you're going to need a socket set. I've got a little quarter inch set. I do have a 1/2 inch and a 3/8 socket set as well. It's handy to have an assortment of sizes just because it is really hard to get to some of these bolts, and if you can't get to it with a socket set, it's also handy to have some ratcheting spanners. So that'll help you get, it's not the right size, but that'll help you get to some of these Yeah, that's the plan. These are cool to have. They're like a nice to have in your garage anyway. So yeah, that's the plan. Socket set, ratcheting spanners, hex bits. Yeah, definitely get a 1/4 inch socket set. This thing's tiny, it's a little Stanley set. I love Stanley socket sets, I think they're awesome. But yeah, they definitely help when it comes to this job, or it did on the BA anyway, so hopefully it does for the AU as well. Right, so to begin with, I'm going to get my 10mm socket, and I'm going to start taking the intake off. So we're going to remove the intake piping and also the airbox as well. You need to take the airbox out because you need to get your arm in underneath the manifold here to get the bolts off. This is probably one of the least fun jobs you can do in the garage, especially in summer under a metal roof. I'm just undoing some hose clamps. This one's got like a weird sort of tension one that just uses like the power of this sort of spring-loaded clamp here to hold it. But yeah, it's not a... I'll probably leave that in one bit actually. It's not a fun job to do in the heat. We've got our little breather hose, take that one off. PCV or whatever you call it. You will need your 1/2 inch set, in my experience, for getting at some of these bolts underneath. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense just because these are so huge, trying to get in under there, but look, we'll see how it goes. So once the intake's out, the snorkel is out, we can pull the airbox out. There's nothing else holding that. This can all sit over here together, so none of that gets lost. Just don't go and walk over there and kick anything. All right. So we've got two, I don't know if you call them sensors, but basically bits on the throttle body here. First one is the idle speed controller. So at the moment, this engine is idling at about 900 RPM, so a bit high, and that screw is backed all the way out. It's not even touching this. So this little throttle actuator here is basically at 0. The throttle's completely closed, and the engine is still getting air from somewhere, even with this thing disconnected. So yeah, it's definitely leaking. When it's running, it sounds like it's leaking from down the back here somewhere. But yeah, look, until we take it all apart, we just don't know. So we've got some hex bolts now. So that's a, I couldn't even tell you what size that is. Doesn't say. But this kit is quite handy because it's got these really long bits on it. And it's got a little adapter here to a 1/4 inch socket. So we can, we'll probably need to put a little extension piece on, probably this little guy, onto there. And then that onto there like that. And that should be, yeah, you just got to make sure they're sort of seated all the way in the head of the bolt, and then just start backing these out. So there's 4 of these. You won't be able to see this next one because it's under the idle speed controller. But we'll loosen that off a little bit. Now, it is cool to have this sort of 1/4 inch socket set, but also this nice long bit, just because if you've got a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, even if you do have a hex bit on it, it's got to be a long one because you can't actually fit these fatter sort of socket sets down, especially to these 2 at the bottom. You just won't be able to get it down there. So this bolt here I'm taking out seems to also hold this bracket, so we just need to make sure it all goes back together. This one's a little bit fiddly. I wonder if I should take the idle speed controller off. Even if you just take some photos on your phone of what you're doing, if you reckon you're gonna forget how to do it, it's handy to have that information. It's just a bit of insurance. Otherwise, if you can't put it back together, you can't drive the car, it'd be very embarrassing. You'd have to call a mobile mechanic or the RACQ or something, or Lubemobile or one of those roadside mobs. So just be careful, take your time. Now we can get a glimpse of this. So that's the bracket. Yeah, look, that just helps the throttle spring back, I guess. This can go with the throttle bolts. I'll remember it's for the top right. So hopefully we can just get this. Now the throttle body's also held on by this little bracket here. So is that a 10? All right, that one's a 10. So this is just basically supporting the weight of the throttle body. Once we loosen this off, it's just going to pop right out. So we'll have a look at this gasket. What I'm going to do first, I'll just put all these bolts aside. Yeah, look, it's a bit hard to tell. There are zones here that sort of have some fuel or something. I don't know what that is. It's not fuel, but yeah, look, I don't know. I can't really tell how well that was sealing. I don't know if you guys can see either, but anyway, we can prep that surface later on both of them and put a new gasket on there. So we need this hex bit again because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at the back, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 hex bolts. Hex-headed bolts, whatever you call those ones. The inner hex. So I reckon my 1/4 inch, I don't know if it's going to have enough leverage on it. Need that little adapted piece. It may not have enough, but let's have a go. Just want to make sure they're down there nice and deep. I probably don't. Let's see if I can go to a thicker. Oh look, I'll see how it goes. That one worked. It's not enough. To me, it feels a bit sketchy, like I don't want to snap something. Surely none of this assembly would snap, but look, we'll see how we go. They're coming off anyway. But see, have a look at this. This is a good example why you need 1/4 inch gear. If you had a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, it's not going to fit. You'd be able to get some of them, like you'd be able to get that one and these ones, but you won't be able to get these, and more importantly, you won't be able to get some of those ones that are down the back there. I'm going to go for this one down the back there, the first one. Everything that's on the BA is going to be exactly the same on this. You won't be able to see what I'm doing here, but it's basically exactly what's on this side is mirrored on that side. So I'm just working my way. This is the second last one I need to crack. After I've cracked the one at the back there, I can then come back and totally loosen and remove every single one. So there's the one at the back. You probably won't be able to see it. Thankfully, it is sort of closer this way than instead of right over the back there. All right, so they're all cracked. So now I'm going to come back and pull them all out, starting at number 1. I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to back the rest of these bolts out, and I'll catch you when that's done. All right, the bolts are out. The upper half of the manifold is loose. If I pull this loom out of the way, hopefully. Okay, so the only thing holding this is we do have a vacuum line, a couple of vacuum lines coming off the back here. One's for the fuel reg, one's for probably going to the charcoal canister or something, and that one's running to the brake booster. So you just need a pair of pliers or some vice grips. I like vice grips because they're nice and chunky. Oh, that hurt. Be very careful of those sort of spring-loaded clamps, because they have a lot of energy built up inside them when you have them open like that. You don't want to damage your hose, but I'm going to try and use this to help me lever it off. There we go, that's off. See if I can get these off first, and then how does that one come off? There we go. So it's just this. Oh, one more thing, guys. You gotta be really careful. I haven't been cut here, but it is very close. I'm gonna have a mark there for a little while, because a lot of these edges on the edge of the casting, so especially the bottom edge of this top half and then the top edge of the bottom half, they're really sharp. Even around here and things like that. Wear gloves, but also be very careful of your arms. Don't lean on things unnecessarily, just because you're going to get cut up if you do. Come off, you bastard. Hey, it's coming off. I'm just fighting this little vacuum hose. There we go. So you should be able to take that out. What's holding that? There we go. There is the top half of your intake manifold. So the job now is these bolts which hold the lower half of the intake to the head. Some of them, like this one and this one, are simple. So start with the easy ones. This is of course holding that bracket that supports the throttle body, so I might just take him off first. Put him aside. You can use a longer extension here as well, just because the upper half of the manifold is now out of the way. But yeah, when you're trying to get to the bottom bolts, that's where it's tricky. Like this one, you could probably get a ratcheting spanner down there. Pick your battles, so I'm going to go for the easy ones first, and then fight for the last couple. See, a lot of these we can just use a 10mm 1/4" socket set. I probably need to do that one anyway, just to get that bracket off. Gee, that one's tight. I need to get a hammer or something. There we go. That's the thermostat. Oh, am I going to need to pull that whole thing off? Coolant tray under there. Looks like we're going to be dropping coolant. I'm not going to drain the whole system because it's really just going down to this level. There's a lot of coolant below this which can stay in the system. So I've just put a coolant container on the ground, and look, whatever comes out, comes out. I'm hoping it just seeps out because the rest of the thermostat housing is attached. It's just the one here which is this one bolt is, or that one bolt there is going to come undone. Now luckily not too much coolant has come out since the initial bit did at the start, so I'm hoping it's going to stay like that. There we go. That's just a bracket which they use to lift the engine in and out of the car. BA has the same thing on it. This is where the fun begins, guys. So basically each intake runner has 2 bolts. So the first one's down there on the left, next one's down there on the right, down on the right, down on the left, down on the left, down on the left, basically. So yeah, it's using a combination of tools. You might be using a socket, you might be using a ratcheting spanner. I initially try the ratcheting spanner first. You won't be able to see shit here, but basically I'm trying to feed it down here past the spark plug cables. And then, yeah, look, see the ratcheting spanner is getting this one. It is very slow going. Look, you're going to get to a point where the spanner then doesn't work because it's too loose. What you can do is try and get your arm in there. You can sometimes use your left and go in here, there we go, above the aircon compressor. So now I'm undoing this second one by hand. You probably can't see, but it's just trying to get access to every single bolt. That is the hard thing. Once we've got these bolts all undone, there are additional bolts you may not be able to see, but this manifold is held on. There's one down here on the front on the AU. There's probably an additional one somewhere under there. It is different to the BA. BA had one under here and one so 1, 2. This one I can see one on the front. I'll just have to see where else, if there is any others. So that's the first 2 runners done. The third one, we can make sure we're on our 10 mil. Where is it, that one? So ratcheting spanners are a good thing to have. You'd struggle to get a socket down there, I reckon. At least with your ratcheting spanner, you can get it undone pretty fast. And then we just need to reach in there. I might go from the front here again. If you've, it is pretty tight down under here. I've got fairly thin arms. It's funny, there's not a lot of things in life you need thin arms for, but for this particular job, it is a godsend. So that's the first 3 runners done. The fourth one, try and get these plugs out of the way. Look at that, we'll be able to use our ratcheting spanner again here. Tell you what, I think this is easier than the BA. I wasn't able to use the ratcheting spanner for so many of them. I don't think I'll be able to get my hand in here. Oh, I can, it's awesome. Again, small hands. I don't know if my hands are small, but they're thin. So for working on a Barra or working on an Intech, can't complain, pretty happy about that. It's gonna be hard to get to the last one, but anyway, let's just tackle that when we get there. And then this one. So we're on the 5th. We're on the 5th runner at the moment. Don't know if I can get across to that one. I can, just. That last one is going to be a pain, I reckon. Fingers crossed it turns out being easy, but my hand is almost cramping up trying to reach over to get this, but I'm going to get it. That's nearly out. There it is. Like, are you going to pull the whole lower intake manifold out? If you do, look at all this stuff you need to sort of get out of the way, but also the thing I'm worried about is you've got to put it all back in place again at the end. Can you remember that? I guess with a photo and a bit of time, you could. I like to try and save time where possible. I don't want to skimp on the job, but sorry guys, you're not going to be able to see this. I'm just trying to get the spanner back on this last bolt. I hope you're all relaxing at home watching this or in your garage. I'm not very relaxed at the moment, but I am sort of working towards this, knowing that this engine is going to run really awesomely afterwards. Now, I can't actually reach in there from the front. I might see if I can reach down here. I can just get one of my fingers on that bolt, but I can't undo it. Maybe I can use both hands. Gee, that's just too tight. It's sort of a bracket thing here. That's for holding this junction box or whatever you want to call it in place. There we go. I can get one finger through there, and if I can feed my other hand around the back, there we go. I've got it. So I'll need to remember this bracket here that holds this junction box in place is held on by the bolts on the manifold. So you just need to remember these things when you put everything back together. Otherwise that junction box thingy, connector, is not going to have anything to support it. It's probably not the end of the world, but it's good to put things back together the way they should go. Ford designed these things for a reason. Otherwise it might be sitting down too close to the source of heat from the engine, too close to the engine block or the head or whatever you want, to the head, I guess. So that is the manifold unbolted from the head. Now we just need to work out where else the manifold is held. I was able to work out there is one bolt, which you probably won't see, down here holding it to this coolant line. It looks like a 10 mil. There we go. That is a lot of oil sitting in that. I think that is literally oil just building up over 20 years. This engine does not use oil. After the last oil change I did, or even before then, it just doesn't use oil, so I think that's just built up over a really long time. It feels like that is attached at the back somewhere. You can't really see shit. You know, that's almost enough where I can just swap out that gasket. I might just be able to leave it, you know. Let's see if this gasket, you know, it's coming, so far it's looking all right. It's not coming out in 1,000 pieces like the one on the BA did. Let's see if I can, oh, that's that bracket. I need to pull it out. Yeah, that's the bracket that holds this little connector here in place. I'll just stick it down there. They can stay there, they'll be safe. I just need to try and pull this gasket out. I reckon we can just change it as it is. So let's have a look at this, see if we can learn anything. I reckon we probably won't be able to. Looking at the condition of it. To me, you can see where the manifold has been, the intake manifold has been pressed against it. To me, it all looks pretty shiny, like there's no... Where's it been leaking then if it's not here? See, that all looks pretty good. Geez, I really hope that there was a leak. It may have been leaking from the steel one. But to me, this gasket actually looks really pretty good. It's not even snapping or brittle. Straight away, the new gasket is a little bit thicker. And look, I know you can't really compare it on the parts where it's been squished, but if you compare it on the little bridges between, I don't know how well you'll see that, but if you compare these, this one is probably about 1 millimeter thicker, the new one. So hopefully, to me, this doesn't really look like an issue, like it was a problem, but hopefully if there was an issue with that, if they weren't sealed correctly, then hopefully this one's going to fix it. But what we need to do is we need to feed the gasket in. Some people are probably going to have a go at me for not taking the whole manifold off. It's partly because I can't be fucked. It's also partly because I did it this way on the BA and it was fine. Just with how that gasket came out, it looked complete, it looked fine, it looked smooth. I couldn't really see any issues with it. So what I'm going to do is I've just fed the gasket down there. It has fallen down a bit far on that end, but this end you can get a bolt and you can sort of screw it in just a couple of turns, so that'll hold that gasket in place. And then we need to do the same on the back here. You need to get your hand down there, push the gasket back up again. There we go, she's up. And I guess if I can put the bolt in that hand and then use this hand to hold that gasket in place, I reckon I could use my long boy extension, because if I can get a socket on this, I can then push into the, yeah, maybe that'll do it. It's going in. That's the problem, you just couldn't get enough sort of pushing force on it. So when you're doing up anything on your engine, there are torque settings, tension for inline 6. How good are forums? Like when forums go offline, we're all going to be stuffed, because tell you what, whenever you're searching for anything, Facebook groups or things never come up. So here we have the Newton meter settings for pretty much everything on the engine. So intake manifold, everything is 25 Newton meters. Cool. So yeah, as much as no one uses forums anymore, I guess because I'm always working on old cars, I sort of rely on them for some things. Yeah, it's just funny how I don't know what we're going to do when forums don't exist anymore. Us Falcon owners, like it's going to be a sad day. Keep them running. Maybe forums are going to make a comeback. Torque wrench, I've only bought these recently. I've got a 1/4 inch one and I've got a 1/2 inch one as well. Actually, I won't torque that up yet. I want to get the other bolts in there and then we can start torquing from the center outwards. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, torque wrenches. For the longest time, I've never had a torque wrench, but they are very useful if you're doing anything on your engine. A little 1/4 inch one just fits together with your 1/4 inch socket set, obviously. I also have tell you what, I do not need it at the moment. I also have a 1/2 inch compatible torque wrench as well for my 1/2 inch socket set. That one's really awesome because it's massive. It's really cool for even using to get your wheels off and stuff as well. Because you get a lot of leverage from the long wrench handle. So with your torque wrench, if you've never used one, I'm still a beginner with it. But hear that click? Basically you just turn until you'll feel the whole wrench sort of click and move. That lets you know you've achieved that torque setting. For some people, you're going to be really surprised I even explained that, but you know, you've got to start somewhere. I'm still pretty basic with working on cars. I'm not an expert or anything, so I'm just starting with the easy bolts first on the top. Get them like 95% of the way in, and then we'll come back with the, we get them pretty tight just by hand, and then we'll come back with the torque wrench and just wrench everything down. You know what I forgot? I forgot to put this thing on here, but I think it looks neater with it off. I'm just going to put it in the cupboard. If I ever decide in the future I'm going to step things up a notch and I want to lift this engine out of the car, I'll just bolt that back on. Unbeknownst to you guys, I have replaced the fuel pump in this car. So it's got a new pump, it's got a new fuel filter. So the fuel delivery, it's also got a new fuel regulator as well. So that reg is a proper AU VCT regulator. I think the VCT engines had a higher pressure fuel reg. It's like 55 PSI. So yeah, when you have the wrong pressure regulator in a VCT engine, it is difficult to start. I think the regular intake engines are like 30 or 40 PSI. Look, I could be talking out of my ass if I've got it wrong. If I've got it wrong, I'll put a little note up on the screen. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the engine's getting fuel, but for some reason it just doesn't enjoy starting. So I'm hoping it's like an air-fuel ratio issue, because fuel ignites at a very specific air-fuel ratio. If it's got the wrong ratio, then it just doesn't burn, or it doesn't burn properly, or ignite when you want it to. I really hope this fixes some of my issues. If it doesn't, then I guess you guys will come along for the journey on trying to work that out. Yeah, the engine runs beautifully. It just doesn't enjoy starting. If you start it finally, turn it off and then go to start it again, it starts easier. But again, I don't think it's a fuel delivery issue, because if you turn the ignition to accessories so that the pump primes, turn it off, prime it again, turn it off, prime it again. I've done that like 5 or 6 times to make sure the fuel rail has the proper fuel pressure built up in it, ready to go. that doesn't make it any easier. It still starts really difficultly. So I'm just working my way along with the bolts. I just used the big boy 1/2 inch socket on the driver on the first one there. We should be able to use, trying to get these bolts in by hand. That's proving to be a little bit difficult. So yeah guys, it's really any tool you can get in there to do up whatever bolt you're doing up. You just gotta keep swapping things around, keep trying them. I'm only on the second intake runner lower bottom bolt here. It turns out a 1/4 inch socket driver might do the job if I can get it spinning the right way. It's annoying. Turn around. So yeah, you just basically have to keep swapping stuff out until you get something that works. Now some of you are going to be wondering why I always wear gloves. And there's a few reasons. First one is so your hands don't get cut up. Second one is when you're filming things in an engine bay and it's really dark and you've got lights in there trying to illuminate it and shine in there. If you stick a white hand in the shot, you've got white on black. The camera tries to adjust so the white is not blown out, so it'll lower the exposure so the white looks good, and then all the black things just disappear. So I do have pretty white skin. I don't see a lot of sun. So yeah, having black on your hands, it just means the shot stays a lot more exposed the way it should, so you can actually see the detail on things. It's something I learnt pretty early on. A lot of you guys do think I'm a bit of a dickhead for wearing gloves. If you've ever watched Brownie's Garage, he's another awesome YouTuber I've seen. He down in Victoria, he wears gloves. So I was joking with him in his comment section that #GloveGang. This bloody... I'm going to need to get a new adjustable... it just locks up. This thing, it's like this little mechanism just jams up. So yeah, it is annoying to wear gloves sometimes. Just if you're trying to feel with your hands something that's going on, you don't get the same feeling through a glove. But look, for what I do, it makes sense. It helps you guys see what's happening. This craft right, I do not recommend them. So it is awesome to have a ratcheting spanner, but I would probably pick a different brand. See, now it's just locked up again, so it's not actually ratcheting. And then the little dial is kind of moving out of place or something. All right, she's resisting now, so do that up as tightly as I can. I think that is as good as it gets. I'll try and get the torque wrench down there later, but I do not have high hopes about that. So that one's done up. Again, we're just waiting for the torque wrench to sort of click. It's clicking. It's not a lot of force involved. So I reckon hopefully those bottom ones have been done up to a similar amount. And do them all. That's nice. That's nice. Just checking them all. Probably can't get to that one because the injector. Check in later. That's the one for the thermostat. Now this is another reason that I hate this job, is because there's so many little things you need to remember. First of which is there's a bracket here. I'm pretty sure it was this bolt right here, which holds on the bracket for the throttle body. I forgot it. Luckily you can take this off after the, if you do have the top half of the manifold installed, you can take this little bracket off relatively easily. So I'm not going to do it up 100% tight. And the other thing I forgot, which luckily is also not too hard to fix, is the bracket for this jobby here. So that'll, with this bolt, the lower half of the intake manifold is basically installed. And before I put the top half on, I'm going to have to clean and prepare that surface for the gasket. It looks already pretty good. I'm probably just going to go over it with the blade of literally a razor blade, and scrape it, keeping the blade sort of vertical. And that should pick up any little ridges and stuff and let me know where they are. Oops. So yeah, after the gasket surface is ready, I'm going to try and get some of that oil out, and then we can put our gasket in. We can offer up our top half of the manifold, reconnect those vacuum lines and the like, make sure everything's good to go, and then we can start reassembly. I do have this like siphon pump, which is designed for fuel, but I could see if it works with, it should work with any fluid really. What I need to do is, when you're trying to prime it, you put the end in the fluid, you've got to block the other end, and then you've got to start pumping. Yeah, see, it is working. You're basically squeezing air out through the oil, and then every time you release this little bubble, it'll start sucking it in. This is just an old microfiber cloth. I know it's a bit fancy to use for something like this. I don't have any normal cloths. This is just an old one. It's probably going to be thrown out anyway. So let's just use it to soak up some oil, shall we? Cool, that's done up again. Can go down on there. Feels pretty good. And again, the gasket that came off also looked pretty good, so I reckon that's going to be fine. Let's just run with it, shall we? So here we have our replacement gasket. So what we need to do is roughly get this thing in place, and then we can make sure our gasket is sitting in the right place. I do a similar thing. You just get your first bolt, make sure it goes through the gasket, and then put it into the hole. Just need to raise the manifold a little bit, and again, you probably won't be able to see, but I'm just jiggling the gasket across until she lines up. It's looking pretty good. So again, I just throw bolts down in any spot where I can see the gasket's in the right position. So this one here, I can see the hole in the gasket is lining up the hole for the bolt. So I'll just throw one down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 1, 2, and then 3, 4 over the back. So I'll give it 25 and then a little bit more for good measure. So I guess we can just work our way out. So I've done the inner 4. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, just keep working out, if you know what I mean, like in a circle. One more. And it's the hardest one. Luckily, nowhere near the hardest thing I've had to do today. All right, that should be done. So, sit rep. We are pretty much ready to reconnect the throttle body. We just got to check our connectors. That's for the idle speed controller, ISC. We've then got the connector here for the throttle position sensor. The only other thing we need to reconnect are the vacuum lines down the back here. So we've got, I think that nipple went on there. We had this one which runs to the brake booster. Luckily it's going on a lot easier than it went off. Got to be very careful of these little spring-loaded clamps when you move them down. So I'll try and get him down where he needs to go. Look at that, perfect. We've then got our little vacuum hose here which runs to the fuel regulator. Make sure he's on all the way. So I think that's all you need to do as far as vacuum hoses go. We do have a bit of SCA brake and parts cleaner. This is kind of like an alcohol solution, so it kind of flashes off if you leave it too long. But it should hopefully do a pretty good job of cleaning all the scunge out we got in here. It's doing all right. Cool. I believe it went like that. Put the bolts through your gasket. It's a pretty tight fit actually. And then we just need to do the same. So make sure the gasket, it's actually moved around a little bit, but if I push it back up, make sure it goes through the hole, which it is. Right, I'm going to nip these up and then I'll come back and torque them down properly. Again, you don't need to do these up super tight. If you do, sometimes you can strip the head out of the hex sort of fitting. You can strip it and it becomes a circle. Then you're having a really bad day. Just doing 25 Newton meters like Ford mods reckoned. You can always trust a forum, can't you? So we can plug in our throttle position sensor. Awesome, we do have a new gasket for the idle speed controller because, hey, it could have been leaking. Actually, that gasket does look pretty shit. Wouldn't it be funny if this whole thing was just leaking through the idle speed controller? That would just, I don't know if I could handle it if that's all it was. I guess we'll never know because I've gone and sort of replaced. This gasket is looking pretty shit though, isn't it? Yeah, this gasket is like caked on. Oh, there we go. Able to get under it a little bit. If it goes down that one, it's going into the intake manifold, so this one's not too, I suppose either of them, it's probably not ideal, but honestly, something material this small is probably not going to do much to the engine. I imagine over the years, this engine's probably suck down all sorts of stuff. So it's on, I think it's nearly hit 190,000 Ks, so it's not a pristine engine. I reckon it can handle a little bit of gasket material for a split second as it goes through the cylinder. I treat this engine pretty mean and it stays keen, so again, I probably should have done this when it was off the car. I didn't think about that. I didn't even realise there was a gasket for this, so you live and you learn. Look at that. I don't have an air compressor or anything, so I just have to use my own air compressor, my own onboard air compressor. I reckon that'll do the job. I guess that little notch is just for holding the gasket, so that's pretty handy, I guess. So yeah, that goes on like so. Get one bolt in there, and then just make sure the other one is aligned, which it is. Get that in there as well, because surely that is enough. Cool. So the only other parts I've got are the airbox parts. So in theory, this engine should run without any of those attached. Yeah, look, if this doesn't fix the problem, we're going to have to go searching. This has been, I told you at the start, and I'll say it again, it's a really terrible job to have to do. But if you own a BA Falcon especially, it's something you're going to have to do at some point if it hasn't been done already. We're in the home stretch, and I think we've fixed it. I've got a good feeling about it. It's something you won't know until you drive it and you let the car warm up. So long as hopefully it starts easier, hopefully it idles lower, and hopefully it uses less petrol as well. All right guys, so the job is done, and what a hell of a job it is. You know, it's not difficult per se, it just takes a long time to get it done. But really, I guess you're all wanting to know what the end result is, and really it is a partial success because I have been able to lower the idle of this engine. It is now idling correctly, and there is one last procedure we have to do to set the base idle on this car, but I'll show you that in a second. But firstly, I wanted to talk about, a few of you would have been alarmed by the oil that was present in the intake of this engine. Now in normal operation, there should be some oil present in the intake manifold because there is a PCV breather system here, and what this PCV valve does is it basically vents pressure from the crankcase of the engine, because when your cylinders are pumping, they're compressing air into these cylinders and it's firing fuel and all that magic happens in there. But as a result, some pressure inevitably is going to leak past these seals on the pistons and end up down in the crankcase of the engine. That pressure has to go somewhere, and basically it vents through this valve here on the top, and it gets sucked back into the intake manifold. And as a result, that's why there's some oil present in there. And that is why people run catch cans, because it's basically sending that oil to a canister where it can be caught and disposed of, instead of going back into your engine and being burnt. But some of you with keen eyes probably would have spotted that I was running an aftermarket PCV valve. And I was a little bit suspicious of this. And when I opened it up, it isn't a valve at all. It actually runs straight through. So basically what that means is when the engine was idling and the throttle body was closed, it was actually sucking air straight from within the engine itself. It probably would have been sucking up a heck of a lot more oil, and that's probably why there was oil in the intake manifold. Now I installed this thing probably about 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers ago. So what I'm going to do is, I've got the factory Ford PCV valve back in there, of course. It's got like a spring arrangement that sort of open and closes depending on when it needs to be used. That's of course judged by air pressure in the intake and in the engine crankcase, so it kind of goes backwards and forwards. But yes, what I did notice is replacing the gaskets lowered the idle, but replacing this with the factory unit lowered the idle so far that the engine actually stalled. So this brings me on to my next point. After you do a little operation like this, you basically need to reset the idle on your car. And it's actually a really easy thing to do. You see this thing on the top here? That is your idle speed controller. And basically what this thing does is it opens a valve in varying amounts to let air from the intake, bypassing the throttle body, throttle plate into the manifold. And by varying the amounts of air, it can sort of affect how fast the engine idles. That's of course controlled by the ECU. And to set the base idle, you basically need to disconnect this clip which plugs into it. That means the engine is basically just idling on its own without any assistance. And the magic figure we want to go for is around 700 RPM. Now, without an OBD controller or scan tool or anything, which I don't have, I'm basically going to be estimating it via the tacho. Now, there is a line at 1000 RPM, there's also a line at 500, and there is a little line in between, which I guess is 750. So what I'm going to be doing, we want about 700, so I want to be aiming for the line or the needle on the tacho to be just a little bit below 750. So I guess we'll just start the car up and see how it's idling. Now, it is going to be idling a little bit unhappily, but what you need to do is get a fairly small flat-bladed screwdriver, and there's a little idle control screw just here on the side of the throttle body. And basically you want to turn that up or down. If you turn it, screw it in, the idle increases. And if you turn it back out again, the idle drops. So what we want to do is adjust this screw and then check the tacho on our car to try and get it around 700 RPM. All right, so that's looking pretty good to me. So now we just simply need to plug the ISC back into the car. The car will take a bit of time to calculate what it needs to do, but eventually the idle drops back to where it needs to be. So that is a fantastic result. So what I'm going to do, guys, is from here on out, I'm going to order a new PCV valve just because this one's pretty old and it was a little bit rattly. They're only about 10 bucks on eBay, so I think you can't go wrong with that. And there's still a bit of an issue with this car. It's a little bit difficult to start, and I still really don't know 100% what it is, but I have a hunch it might be dirty injectors, because if you saw one of my previous videos, you would have seen just how dirty the fuel filter was in this car. But also when I changed the fuel pump, I didn't put that on film, but when I did change the pump, it looked pretty grotty as well. So I imagine the entire fuel system is probably a little bit scungy, and perhaps some of that scum is probably built up in the injectors. It does run fine on power when you've got it on wide open throttle, but maybe it's something to do with the spray pattern, the way the fuel's coming out. Maybe it's just not burning properly on startup. I don't really know, I'm not an expert. But when you consider a full set of standard injectors for an AU Falcon is about 100 bucks, I'm probably just going to get a brand new set, throw them in. You can get the existing ones cleaned, but really that'll probably cost a similar amount. So yeah, that's it, guys. This engine is running a little bit better incrementally as I go. Every little thing I do seems to improve it, except for some stupid ones. So I'm looking forward to getting this engine 100%. I reckon it's going to be the injectors, but I'll bring you guys along for the ride and we'll see what happens. So yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Terribly sorry this video was so long, but I wanted to record every single step because I reckon it's going to be very beneficial to AU and BA Falcon owners out there. And I didn't really want to skip any of the steps. So I appreciate, it probably would have been pretty boring if you don't own one of these cars, but you know, maybe it's therapeutic and relaxing to watch someone doing such a shitty job on their car in the comfort of your lounge room in the aircon. But yeah, thank you very much for watching regardless. If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing, like the video, and also check out some of the other clips I've got here on the side. And yeah, see you next time.